So it's day 7, Sunday, January the 23rd, 22nd, 23rd, 22nd. Sitting on top of a little rocky mountain, sheltering behind a boulder and an acacia tree, just trying to kill the wind so it doesn't ruin the podcast. But it's the shadows are quite long. It's 20 to 5. We've got an hour till sunset, and another long day, but another amazing day as we progress southwest towards Jeddah.
Welcome back to the final steps of our Heart of Arabia expedition podcast. I'm Mark Evans. I'm an explorer based in Scotland and Oman, and someone who's fascinated by the inspiring world around us, its people and its cultures.
We've travelled all day, I would say, until about 2 o'clock, without seeing a single living thing, human, camel, nothing, just a real expanse of desert, and totally deserted desert.
The Heart of Arabia expedition is following in the footsteps of a man described by some as the greatest of all Arabian explorers, Harry St. John Abdullah Philby. We're travelling across Saudi Arabia from the east coast port of Al Ghair to the bustling metropolis of Jeddah on the western coast.
This is the Red Sea. We've reached Jeddah, so a little bit of a sound of the waves breaking on the beach here in Jeddah. If I raise my head, I'm looking across at Sudan.
However, we're not quite there yet, so I hope you'll join me and the rest of the team, Reem, Anna and Alan, because we still have a huge swathe of desert to cross before we reach those waves.
Philby never mentioned any, he travelled through an area of extraordinary archaeological heritage, but that was not one of the things that really grabbed his attention, but much else did. He described this vast tract of land over which Reem and I have trekked today, and then with Alan and Anna, we covered more ground in the vehicles this afternoon when we reached this road. He described the highland tract of the immense steppe of Shifa, and that's what we've walked across today. With the exception of a few low hummocks scattered over the gravel plain, not a landmark was to be seen in all its expanse, until we came into view of the sand barrier of Uruk al-Sabai. And that's where I'm sitting right now, because this is the last great challenge in our progress southwest to Jeddah. It's an enormous line of dunes. Philby estimated, so Philby camped pretty much here on December the 20th, 1917. And as far as he could work out by talking to his Bedouin companions, these dunes that I'm sitting on now, 70 miles long and 12 miles across. That was what he estimated. So these are the biggest dunes outside of the Rub al Khali, much further to the south and the east. They are enormous mountains of sand, and we, like Philby, anticipated quite a few problems crossing, which was why we camped just on the edge of them yesterday. We'd run out of daylight really to attempt to cross, and really that was not the time of day to get stuck and have to push and get sand ladders out. So we spent the night tucked up in a little relatively sheltered spot, which turned out to be one of the best campsites we have had. Absolutely beautiful, a gorgeous view, sheltered from the wind, lovely and sandy, extraordinary stars. There's no moon at all last night or the night before. Reem's camera trap paid dividends last night. The tin of tuna, smelly tuna, did its bit. Lots of fox tracks around the small bush where Reem had hidden her camera trap, and sure enough all the tuna had gone. So hopefully we'll get some pretty good images of a fox getting stuck into a pile of tuna at some point from the team at Coast. So as I lay in my bag this morning, I was looking, really craning my neck. I couldn't quite see the southern sky. I was looking for the Southern Cross. The first noise I heard, it was totally silent all night. Beautiful, really powerful silence. Was a bird starting to call in what I thought was darkness. I drifted off to sleep and slept a bit fitfully during the night. But when I groped around and found my watch, it was about 5 a.m. It's still an hour or so before sunrise. But you know what? The hoopoo larks, there's a particular species of bird here that runs around a little bit like a mini roadrunner, and like our skylark in Britain that lives in flat open country, it flies high to get a view to look around for predators. Exactly. The hoopoo larks fly up and come down with a beautiful whistling call, and they were starting to call well before I couldn't detect any change in the light looking in the east where the sun was about to rise, but they clearly can, and they start calling quietly to each other and then getting louder and louder and more joined in as the light does slowly increase. And Alan and I walked on top of the hill above camp and watched the most beautiful sunrise.
Mark, you've talked lots about nature throughout your audio diaries and in the podcast while you've been on expedition. How connected do you feel to nature and the natural environment when you're in isolation, away from other human beings?
Oh, immensely connected. The first sound you hear is the sound of nature, and the last, when I wake in the morning, it's usually the sound of a bird calling out of the darkness, because they detect that rising sun much earlier than I can. And the last thing I hear at night, it'll be the wind or an owl calling. So you do feel immensely connected. I mean, the book I often refer to as the Bible of desert travel is Arabian Sands by Thesiger, but really its equivalent for the Arctic is a book that I finally read a few years ago called Arctic Dreams by an author called Barry Lopez. And Lopez refers to this similarity between the Bedouin and the Inuit, both of whom live on the edge of human tolerance, immersed in nature. And he says they both have their native eye. Even the merest flutter of a bird on a dune or on a snow patch, they don't miss it. And the longer you spend in nature like we did, the more that native eye comes back. I think we're all in danger of hanging around shopping malls, of losing that connection. We were always aware of the state of the moon. We were always aware of sunrise, sunset. We were aware of wind direction, and we're aware of the ripples of the sand. I mean, that connection is incredibly strong and gets stronger the more you spend in the desert.
Philby crossed these dunes a little bit further north than we did, and he spoke about an old fort that guarded a particular waterhole, and we've spent this afternoon visiting a couple of old waterholes that we could find, but all of them were dry, no water and no sign of any fort. Philby did say it was fairly dilapidated when he saw it. But for him and his team, now this was... He's really into Neki country, because he's now in the land of the tribes that support Sharif Hussein of Mecca, and this was why he's doing this journey. Philby, for the last few weeks when terrain, or last few days when terrain has allowed, he's been choosing his campsites hidden away, out of sight, because he doesn't want to attract attention of the local tribal people. But out here in these enormous plains, he has absolutely no choice. There is nowhere to hide. Now that has advantages, because it means that you can see who's coming. You're not going to get spooked by surprise. And he writes about this in his book, The Heart of Arabia. And he says, we were now clear of the dangers lurking in the folds of the highlands. In the daytime, no foe could now approach us without timely warning of his presence. But at night, no friendly shelter concealed the campfire from prowling brigands, should any be about. For 4 days since leaving Kasariya behind us, we had seen no living soul, and really, we've probably only seen about half a dozen people over the last 4 or 5 days. These sands, other than a physical barrier, all of a sudden took on a rather more sinister tone. So he just arrived in advance of his the baggage train, and they were plodding ahead of the group and toiling up a long sandy slope, and he said, around us rolled a sea of sand, utterly desolate in its emptiness. The leaders suddenly drew up. Sadiq, they shouted in different keys. We were with them before we realised what had happened, and found ourselves covered at a range of 20 yards by a dozen rifles. For all of our precautions, we had walked straight into an ambush. Our rifles slung to our saddle frames, unloaded, and we were completely at the mercy of our surprisers, while the main body, still far behind us, was hurrying up at its best speed. In the meantime, there was nothing to be done but to hold up our hands under the menace of these ominous barrels and to parley with the foe. There then arose a hubbub such as I have seldom heard. 3 or 4 of our opponents, ill-clad and bareheaded, rose from their cover of bushes, while the rest ceased not to cover us. Of the negotiations which ensued, everybody shouting at the top of his voice, and all together, to me not a single word was intelligible. The Rafiqs, who had all been behind, now came up and advanced into the forefront of the wordy melee. Salam alaikum, walaikum assalam. The words of peace were spoken, and the tension was over. Come on with me, said Saad, and I followed him obediently aside, while friend and foe gathered on the summit of the ridge to fraternise. Let us halt here for the night, said Ibrahim, and I yielded, but with little murmuring, as there was little hope of our now reaching the further edge of the sands. We and our erstwhile enemy camped side by side in adjoining hollows. I suggested that we might invite them to share our evening meal, but my proposal was negatived. In the first place, it was still unknown to them that the party they had just ambushed contained an Englishman, and the discovery of an infidel amongst us might cause them regrets at the moderation they had exercised in the moment of their undisputed ascendancy, and would certainly be blazoned abroad by them on their onward journey, perhaps to our undoing. And I rested content with the reflection that my identity was not as obvious to strangers as I assumed it must be. So I don't think such challenges lie in store for us tonight, thankfully. Tomorrow, on we plod. Reem and I, the alarm will go off at 6:30 before sunrise. Reem and I will make forward progress for the community of Kerma. We think we might reach there just before sunset tomorrow, and we may set up camp and travel into the Bedouin community there to see if we can get some water and some food, and then come back to our campsite. So making good progress. This, I think, is day 8 now, so we're at day 8 out of 14, and so we're over halfway. I think in the psychology of expeditions, this is always the sort of quieter time. I always liken expeditions to marathons. You know, the first 5 miles you barely know you're running because of all the excitement. The last 5 you put on a sprint because you can smell the finishing line. But it's that sort of third quarter. The second quarter you're into a routine, but the third quarter, where we are now, kind of 75% of the way through our entire journey, that's the bit where you start to get tired, where the finishing line is still a wee way ahead, but everybody's doing really well. Anna's on the mend, still like me croaking a bit, but we're doing okay. The sun has set. I can't see a light in any direction, but it's going to be very different to that in 5 or 6 days' time.
And just like that, I'd spoken too soon. Reem came down with the same chest infection that Anna and I suffered with, but Reem kept going, and in a very curious and coincidental way, her grandfather before her was becoming weary at this very same point. Philby Sr. wrote,
The next day was one of strenuous exertion. For 6 days we had fared on nothing but rice and dates, varied by a hare on only 2 occasions, and all were agreed that we must make Kerma before nightfall. To make matters worse, my camel had picked up a flint the previous afternoon and had gone badly lame, with the result that the awkward gait, coupled with a series of long fatiguing days, made me ache all over. In this condition I mounted a camel which I discarded for its rough paces in the early stages of the journey, but was faced with a march of 11.5 hours, broken only by a single halt of less than an hour, my discomfort and agony increasing with every step, until by the time we arrived at our destination I was in the last stages of exhaustion. So we're not quite at that stage, I have to say, but there's no doubt about it. Being in the heat day after day after day, walking under the direct sun, it really does take its toll. So everyone's doing really well. We're plodding on. We reached Kerma ourselves today. It's a much bigger community than when Philby arrived in 1917, and Philby was in for a treat, as we are in for a treat this evening. Tonight we have camel meat, and it's the first time that we have tasted camel meat on our journey, and it was the first time for Philby also. And he wrote, "We were fortunate in arriving on a day when butcher's meat was available, for with the Bedouin being away, sheep or goats were unobtainable, and the people left behind in the village contented themselves with the occasional slaughter of a camel. The meat, which I now tasted for the first time, was coarse and very tough, but satisfying, and not unlike inferior beef."
We found a camel cafe in Kurma and stocked up with fuel and water before retreating back out to the desert to set up our camp. And almost immediately on leaving Kurma, the desert landscape changed again.
And we're on the edge of big lava fields called harat in Arabic, and it's a sea of black, as I can see, with lots of acacia trees dotted around. It's puncture country, you can't drive in a straight line, so the going is very tough. It's great for animals like the gazelle and the wolves, because it's very difficult to be hunted in this stuff. So reputedly, according to the ecologists, the numbers of wild mammals in the harat are larger than the areas outside, simply because people can't get in there and chase them and hunt them down. So tomorrow Reem and I will walk away from Kerma. We'll walk a little bit through this harat, these lava fields, making progress towards Taif, the hill station, the hill community of Taif. Tomorrow I think will be Wednesday, and we hope to reach Taif on Thursday, which will be quite exciting because there's quite a large community. Philby spent a couple of days there, was amazed by the architecture, the beautiful Ottoman architecture that he saw in Taif, so we're looking forward to that. So that's it, end of day 9. The days are ticking away and the sun is going down, so I'm going to walk back to the camp and join the others and have a cup of tea.
How do you mentally prepare yourself for coming back into civilization or big urban areas when you've spent periods of time out in isolation or in solitude?
Good question. Well, I've actually been the source of various academic papers on this, because I've been doing it for about 40 years, and probably Pete Allison, who was at Edinburgh University, now at Penn State, is the guru on the challenges that people face when coming back from remote locations, often on extended expeditions. I mean, the longest time I was out was a year, and coming back into central London, that was quite a shock, because there wasn't the transition that we enjoyed on Heart of Arabia. Heart of Arabia was relatively shorter. It was 2 legs of 14 days, but each of those legs ended in a city, and we could see the lights of that city getting brighter and brighter every night that we travelled through the desert. So it's hard, but I've been doing it so long now that I know pretty much what to expect. Our lives have moved on. We've had an incredibly rich and intense experience. Other people haven't had that opportunity, and it's hard for them to connect what we've experienced. And you do find that no doubt about it, you do feel a bit lonely when you come back. And I recall once on our year in the Arctic, a group returned to London after 4 months. We hadn't seen another individual for 4 months. And this lad called me on a satellite phone from a shopping mall in Basingstoke on Christmas Eve, absolutely packed with people, and claimed that he felt absolutely lonely, surrounded by people. And so it is hard, but the expedition, the journey, the more of these you do, you realise that the journey is the springboard for so much more, and there's so much more to come from the Heart of Arabia expedition.
If I said to you that early this morning there was a light frost on the roses, and the baboons were playing around the rocks, and it was a temperature of just above 0 degrees at an altitude of 6,100 feet, you probably wouldn't think I was in Saudi Arabia. But such is the variety of landscapes in this amazing country that we've been travelling through for the last 4 weeks. Taif was a place where Philby spent 2 days, and I can see why. It's beautiful. I think it's the 6th largest urban area in Saudi Arabia. About 700,000 people live here in Taif today, obviously much smaller when Philby arrived. And he arrived on Christmas Day 1917, and he said, right glad we were to see our goal before us. After about 45 miles of strenuous travel and 11 hours in the saddle with but 2 short breaks, the sun was now low over the hills, and we hastened down the slope and up the valley past little hamlets girt around by orchards and fields. You can probably hear the call to prayer behind me. It's Friday now, just after midday, so this is the main day of prayer here in Saudi Arabia. Philby said there was little to arrest the attention of our weary eyes until we came to the great 4-storied marble palace of Shubra, the palace of Ali Pasha, ex-Grand Sharif and cousin of Hussein ibn Ali, king of the Hijaz, towering above its splendid orchards. I marvelled to see a building so exquisite, with the great steps leading to the front door and the delicate window shutters of fretwork in Arabia, and my companions, most of whom had never been out of the desert, stood amazed at such magnificence. Well, today Shubra Palace is right in the heart of the bustling modern metropolis of Taif, and it was the first place that we visited yesterday because Philby described it so beautifully, and he describes it very, very well. It is the most remarkable of buildings, very well restored and protected by the Heritage Commission here in Saudi Arabia under the Ministry of Culture. We were allowed to wander around the stables, and when Philby came here, it was not animals in the stables, it was ostrich, a couple of ostrich, which must have been quite entertaining. But we spent about an hour in Shubra Palace being shown around by our wonderful hosts. We were decorated with garlands of flowers, and just spent most of yesterday and this morning visiting similar sites, real strong Ottoman influence to the architecture here, some beautiful old palaces, and all the time this lovely backdrop of mountains, juniper trees up above, and temperatures, very, very mild temperatures here because of the altitude. It's worth noting, of course, that at this point, we know now that we have 2 more days of travel but until we reach Jeddah. So we're going to go up and over the top of the mountains, which are around Taif, and drop down the seaward side in 48 hours' time to the flat plains of Jeddah, where our journey will come to an end. But at this point in 1917, Philby arrived in Taif expecting to find someone, a British officer from Egypt who'd been sent to meet him here. And his plan, amazingly, was to turn around and go all the way back to Riyadh with this man, and so prove to the powers that be in Cairo that actually the central desert of Arabia really was under the control of Ibn Saud. And to have to turn around and go back across what we've crossed over the last 10 or 11 days would be mind-boggling. And he had it much harder than we did. 11 and a half days in the saddle every day. 11 and a half hours in the saddle every day. Extraordinary. But he was prepared to do that. That was the plan all the way along. But much to his disappointment, when he arrived here in Taif, there was no message from Baghdad. No one had arrived from Egypt. So he was very much back to plan B, which was to plough on to Jeddah and so complete his crossing. So for us last night, it was really reading through Philby's notes on his 2 days in Taif. We found a place just on the edge of the city, tucked up into the mountains, where we camped under the tallest tree, what is reputedly the tallest tree in Taif. There were packs of fighting and squabbling dogs all around us, donkeys bleating through the night, a really heavy dew. Our sleeping bags were soaking wet this morning. Beautiful birds. If you're an ornithologist, there's a bird has appeared here at this altitude, which we find in southern Oman, and we haven't seen it anywhere else on our journey yet. It's called the Tristram's grackle. Around us, our campsite, the land was being farmed. Pomegranates, the most beautiful pomegranates grow here in this climate. Roses, we've already mentioned. Grapes, lots of citrus fruit. A beautiful, beautiful place. And rightly and understandably, it's been the summer retreat for people from the plains down below in Jeddah for many, many centuries. It might be worth just making reference to Philby's Christmas dinner, because obviously for the last several days he's been, like us, chomping on bits of sand in everything really, in the middle of the desert. The hospitality he experienced here in Taif is exactly the same as we have. You know, Taif has obviously changed hugely since 1917, but the one thing that hasn't changed is the hospitality, and that's been the same really from when we arrived in Al Aghair many, many weeks ago. Saudi Arabia is the most extraordinarily warm and welcoming country, and Philby wrote about that frequently. On settling down in what was to be his base in Taif for 2 days before pushing on, he said 2 great circular mats were brought in and spread upon the carpet in the middle of the hall. On each was placed a metal tray with limbs of sheep piled high on steaming rice, whose snowy whiteness contrasted strangely with the brown mess of dusty rice boiled in dirty water to which we had grown accustomed in the desert. Such was our Christmas dinner, to which we sat around, myself and my 12 comrades, and of which little was left but bare bones when we rose to wash our hands and resume our seats around the fire for coffee. It's Saturday, January the 28th. The days are running out, sadly, but they're not getting any less eventful. Today, fantastic day. We've really, the desert, the steppe and the sand and the open plains and the lines of mountains of Central Arabia really are behind us now. And as Philby said, we're crossing the Great Barrier, which fronts the Western Sea, the sea the barrier that separates the central deserts of Arabia from Jeddah and the coastline. We left Taif after a couple of days of exploring, and what beautiful days they were. What a beautiful city Taif is. But like Philby, we were getting a little bit restless. We needed to move on, and all the sophistication and the civilization of Taif, we were quite keen to get back to the simplicity of our travelling and camping wild in the desert. The chapter to reflect this change, the chapter of Philby's book, is now referred to as the Holy Land, because we are approaching the holy city of Mecca. At one point today, I think we were only 37 kilometres away from Mecca, which is the holiest city in Islam. 1.9 billion Muslims around the world face Mecca 5 times a day in prayer. It is a hugely significant place. Philby was not going to Mecca. I think his men may have harboured secret desires to do so, but Philby was really intent on reaching Jeddah, because whilst he was in Taif, he received a message from Sharif Hussein of Mecca to proceed with all haste to meet Sharif Hussein in Jeddah. So Philby, like us, started moving, and yesterday we reached a small wadi. Campsites are much harder to find now. We're in the mountains. The wadis are quite tight, quite rocky. It's quite hard to find flat ground. Probably, I would say, the worst night's sleep I've had on the entire trip. Just mosquitoes everywhere. You cover your face, but then that gets quite claustrophobic. But anyway, they did seem to clear off at one point, or am I kidding myself? I was certainly got plenty of lumps all over my body this morning. We really did pick up on Philby's trail today. We were able to follow the wadi that he followed down from Taif to a village called Wadi Laimun, and it is actually Wadi Lemon. It translates into Wadi Lemon, and here Philby overnighted. And he was clearly incredibly moved by what he saw, as were we. Some lovely old buildings. The richness of the land in the valley bottoms, it's hard to believe that you're in Arabia. It was absolutely wonderful because, as always, a curious local came out of the house and came over to us, and it was just great to engage because they're always such characters and always so friendly. Amazingly, and this doesn't surprise me really, bearing in mind what's happened on this journey, his grandfather and Reem's grandfather, Abdullah Philby, met many, many years ago, and these connections continue even right up until almost the end. And Philby wrote, so we have a photograph in his book, which we were able to wander around the village and find the exact spot where he took to take this photograph, which was great. One last connection really before we enter Jeddah tomorrow. But he wrote in his book, a few steps brought us to an orchard, at whose edge we watered our camels at the babbling brook of Ain Bardan, a perennial stream rising in the hillside on our left and providing the whole of the Madik settlement with water. Continuing, we found the valley straightened by sheer precipices on either side to a narrow neck, beyond which the tropical beauty of Wadi al-Laman burst suddenly upon our admiring gaze. Orange and palm groves, banana plantations, fields of young corn and lucerne blended their different shades of green in a wild highland setting. On either side the mountains reared their rugged heads to a height of 1,000 feet, and here and there stood lesser knolls of rock crowned with hamlets of rough-hewn stone, and we explored some of those hamlets or the remains of them today. In the whole breadth of Arabia, I had not seen beauty such as this. In all my wanderings thereafter, I saw not its like or equal. Such might be Taif in springtide, but here was nature unadorned and perfect. So, like us, at this stage of the game, Philby was one day away from Jeddah. Our plan is to overnight here tonight. We're camping now. Sunset's getting later. The sun's just dropped behind the hills. I can see the golden glow there. You can possibly hear the sparrows calling in the acacia trees around me. You can possibly hear the buzz of a drone above my head, which one of the guys is flying, trying to film the campsite. But our plan is hopefully to have a better night than last night. Hopefully there won't be so many mosquitoes. And then tomorrow we will head down onto the flat plain called the Tihama, upon which Jeddah sits. And then we will end our journey from coast to coast, from sea to sea, by dipping our toe in the Red Sea at Jeddah.
One of my great hopes for the Heart of Arabia expedition is that we inspire young people like Philby to journey with purpose, to lift their heads from their phones and digest the world around them. And so on our final night before we headed into Jeddah, the team met up with some students from Jeddah Prep and Grammar School who, as it turned out, had been paying a huge amount of interest to our expedition.
My name is Haya Memon, and we have been tracking you on the website of the Heart of Arabian Expedition, and it has been great. We could see that you were not completely on the route, but you were loosely on the route of Philby, and it was amazing. We also did like descriptive writing and journaling like we were like in a place of yours, and we wrote journals and descriptive writing about the journey, this amazing journey.
Fantastic. Wow. One of the main purposes we had on this trip, we're doing some science projects, but also it's really important for us that we want to inspire the next generation of Philbys to go out into the world and explore things and make a difference and help us understand more what is around us. Because if you just go for a walk and do nothing, well, nothing moves forward. Make a difference in your life. That's what Philby was all about. So we really hope that our journey inspires you to make your own contribution to making the world a better place. So what else have you done? You've been doing creative writing. Anybody else want to tell me a little bit about what you've been doing?
My name is Alia Mu'mina, and in our school we had this idea of each person doing a 1 kilometer walk to basically represent the walk from the west to the east side of Saudi Arabia. So each person sent a time lapse of them doing a 1 kilometer walk, and we're gonna put them all together in one big video and present it to you guys.
Wow, fantastic. So you folks have walked, every student in the school has walked a kilometre?
Yes.
Wow. And almost every. How many students in the school?
700.
700. Wow, that's incredible. Gosh, the fittest school students on the planet. Brilliant. So you've done creative writing through the eyes of an explorer, is it okay? Yes. And you've walked a kilometre in our footsteps, a sort of pseudo desert crossing. What else have you been doing?
My name is Ammar Mu'mina, and we have been writing in, let's say, your perspective of how your journey was. What were your obstacles? What were your equipments? And in history, we have been looking at Abdullah Philby's history in the past, how he walked and the tools that they used, and compared them to today's tools.
It's wonderful to hear that you're changing what's happening in and out of the classroom already, and you haven't even reached Jeddah yet, but you will very, very soon. What was going through your mind on those final few kilometres into Jeddah, Mark?
Oh, going back to that marathon analogy, really. It's I remember running up Birdcage Walk in London, 1 mile to go, and I was overtaken by Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse years ago, and I was utterly exhausted, and I think we were really tired approaching Jeddah as well. And but really, that finish line is now very much in sight. So you've got this real mix of emotions again. The adrenaline and the anticipation and the excitement now starts to counteract the fatigue, and we were really looking forward to it because, throughout this expedition, we've had fantastic support from the Ministry of Culture in Saudi Arabia, the Heritage Commission, the British Embassy, the British Consulate. So many people were involved in this, and we were just the little bit of the iceberg sticking above the water, really having the great experience. But we knew that those people were waiting for us. We knew that there was going to be a great reception for us in Jeddah, multiple receptions, in fact, with different groups. So it was one of great excitement, immense pride and satisfaction, immense pride in the team, what they'd achieved, and just really looking forward to maybe a shower and shaving off a very scratchy and itchy beard.
This is the Red Sea. We've reached Jeddah, so a little bit of a sound of the waves breaking on the beach here in Jeddah. If I raise my head, I'm looking across at Sudan across the way. So we started off looking at Iran and Bahrain. Now we're looking at Sudan. So it's Tuesday, January the 31st, and finally, after 48 whirlwind non-stop hours here in Jeddah, I have a bit of time to sit down and share what we've been doing with you since we arrived. A couple of evenings ago, actually, I think the evening of the 29th, and we were able to, after meeting a group of students from Jeddah Prep and Grammar School who travelled out to a desert camp to meet us, we dipped our toes in the Red Sea and so completed our
sea-to-sea, coast-to-coast crossing of Arabia in the footsteps of Harry, St. John, Philby. And a journey that started with Reem and I walking at sunrise on November the 15th as the sun rose over Bahrain and Iran. Our journey ended at sunset, with the sun setting across the Red Sea over Sudan, which lies opposite to us here in Jeddah. And we're all absolutely exhausted, typical of any expedition. If you kept going, you'd be okay, but as soon as you take your foot off the gas, you realise just how tired you are. But despite that tiredness, it's been a very busy 36 to 48 hours since we arrived. And it was inevitably the same for Philby. He arrived here almost on the last day of December in 1917, and he had lots of dignitaries, including Sharif Hussein of Mecca, waiting for him to meet him. Philby wrote, as always, in great detail about their final day of their journey, and he wrote, "A broad upward-sloping glade led us to Mizal, a watchtower in ruins perched on the summit of a low ridge. The hills now thinned out before us to a step-like plain, guarding a low rocky chain surmounted by the guard tower of Raghama. Beyond the tower, out of nothing, rose a narrow strip of blue. Our eyes, long wearied by the endless desert of sand and steppe and rock, rested on the soft horizon of the western sea, and our hearts were glad within us as we hastened on. Among us were a few, including Badr, who had never seen the sea before." From Raghama, where a goodly crowd was gathered about the coffee booths, we looked down upon the coral palaces of Jeddah, enveloped in the midday haze. A vast sandy beach shelved down before us. We were but half a dozen who led the van, the rest were far behind. "More songs," I said to Tommy, "that we may ride the faster," and Tommy opened up with the song of the camp, to which the weariest camel will respond, scenting repose and plentiful fodder at the couching. At length the weary march drew to an end, and at mid-afternoon on the last day of the year we streamed through the Mecca gate, our goal attained, and Arabia crossed from sea to sea. Philby spoke more about what a melting pot of races and creeds and colours Jeddah was, being a seaport opposite Africa, and it's been very apparent to us. The air is very different to the east. The buzz of being in a large city of about 4 million people is very different to the desert for us, but we really do feel next to the sea. Lots of African people wandering around, and lots of people I spoke to yesterday from Egypt, from Sudan, from Eritrea. A fantastic hodgepodge of people, which make Jeddah such a wonderfully colourful place. Yesterday was the official welcome, and it couldn't have been in a more beautiful place. Nassif House is one of these old coral buildings to which Philby referred. It's more than 100 years old, perfectly preserved by the Ministry of Culture and the Heritage Commission here, and open as a museum for people to drift in and out to look at how old Jeddah used to be. And it's one of dozens and dozens of old houses amazingly built out of coral that still stand, and there's a huge renovation and preservation project going on, turning a lot of these beautiful old buildings into boutique hotels, and like Nassif House, a wonderful museum. We were incredibly grateful to our friends at the Ministry of Culture for organising such a fantastic reception yesterday. Lots of media there, lots of dignitaries from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Culture, the Heritage Commission. So it was a fantastic day. We thought it might last for about an hour, hour and a half, but we were still there 4 hours later, given a tour of old Jeddah, which was absolutely fascinating, wandering the narrow alleyways of the old souk.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please, and if you'd like to take a seat while you can, we can get started.
We were then entertained by the British consulate here in Jeddah, and we had a wonderful gathering of Saudi and expatriate people from the community here in Jeddah, about 70 to 80 people.
This has been an incredible endeavour. Across 1,300 kilometres of a vast, almost empty landscape of shifting sands and climate extremes, a true test of human resilience and determination.
It was a wonderful night, a great opportunity for us to say thank you to the countless people that have made this journey and this project happen, and nice for the team, for Anna and for Alan and Reem, to hear a lovely message from our patron, Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal, which the Consul General read out to all who were gathered in the room.
I have to say as well that news has travelled far and wide, and the Princess Royal has asked me to pass on her congratulations to all the participants and their support teams for successfully finishing the Heart of Arabia trans-peninsular journey. Her Royal Highness is well aware what a demanding feat this was and congratulates the organisers and participants. The Princess Royal would also like to thank the supporters of the expedition who made this journey possible. Her Royal Highness looks forward to receiving a full report on the journey when you get back. Finally,
It's now 12 weeks since that evening, and I've had lots of time to reflect on the expedition. But before I do, I want to hear from the team. Alan Morrissey, Reem Philby, and first of all, Anna Maria Pavalache.
It's the 14th day of our journey, and I have the strange feeling that I've been here for such a long time. There is something new about every single place we've travelled to, and at the same time it seems so familiar. But who knows, just imagining how this journey was 105 years ago and travelling back in time opens the door for another imaginary journey through Philby's writing and black and white images. Saudi generosity is so overwhelming, from official government agencies to friends that brought food for us on our journey, and the many locals inviting us for a coffee. In the end, doesn't matter if you are in a city or crossing a Bedouin camp, the door is always open and everyone is welcoming you with a meal or with a classical coffee. If in the first leg the landscape for me didn't change much, I found the trip from Riyadh so rich and diverse, from cold highlands to deserts, dunes, from the lava fields that they call harats to the mountainous area close to Mecca. The Talmudic inscription and the stone artifacts are another important aspect of the trip, showing the presence of human being for such a long time. One thing that was important for me when photographing, we all know that everything, and we feel that everything around us is in a permanent change and movement. For me as a photographer, inside that constant movement, there is one single moment in which the elements are in balance. And that's the moment where you find the perfect equilibrium of a moment in life which can make history.
I'm sitting in a lovely wadi, green, fertile, surrounded by sheep, goats, lovely bird life. Well, you know, thinking about it, so many thoughts and impressions occur to me. One of our expedition objectives was to perhaps showcase the diversity of the country of Saudi Arabia. And in my mind, at least, in what we witnessed and experienced on our travels, I think that objective was nobly achieved. You know, for those who adventure through Saudi Arabia, There's truly a wonderment in every day to be seen, arguably every hour even, of travelling this vast country. A country of rich rewards for those who invest their time into it. And for me, it's a wonderment that's not only in the tangible that we saw, but lying also in the intangible. I'm thinking particularly of how it was for me so rewarding each day to be reading Philby's journals from his 1917 trip as we travelled. Not just mapping the landscapes from his descriptions, but also notes on the communities and the peoples with whom he interacted. You know, it was his journals formed for me undoubtedly a literary form of augmented reality, supplementing the experience that we were walking through. And for me also, another intangible benefit has been how relentlessly surprising how frequent we met local people along the way, more often than not, by pure coincidence and chance, certainly not always orchestrated, who actually knew about Philby, Abdullah Philby, who were very aware of his interactions with personal family members and ancestors in the past. Something that I can only imagine makes the present-day Philby family, both in England and the branch here in Saudi Arabia, so proud. These people have acknowledged Philby's reach on the society here and its history, and recognising his influence on so many people must be something that my expedition colleague Reem Philby is surely struggling to grasp in magnitude. What a takeaway for her from this trip. Finally, to wrap up at a personal level, my great gratitude to Mark for allowing me the opportunity to be part of such a multi-layered, multifaceted trip as the Heart of Arabia, for calling upon my own experience and expertise, modest as it is, in contributing to what has been a brilliant and truly talented team. Just to taste the Saudi outdoors, the desert on foot, on camel, and of course driving our trusty 4x4 vehicles has been a rewarding beyond words, but to have had the opportunity to share this unique adventure with such fabulous people as Mark, Reem and Anna Maria is truly and surely once in a lifetime experience. No doubt Philby would have approved.
So I don't think I could have asked for a better way to know my grandfather than being part of this expedition. Not only did it provide me with time with Mark, talking about him during our morning walks, or reading parts of his book over dinner, or with Alan, who would show me the Philby route on the map and then explain if we're following the same route or diverting a little and why we would be doing that, or with Anna, who would capture the special sites that my grandfather visited with her highly skilled eye. In addition to all of that, I got to actually walk on his footsteps, face some of the challenges he went through with his companions, although our experience was probably at a smaller extent of the harshness, I would think. My grandfather's presence showed very much in the memories of the locals that we spoke with and certain specific sites that we visited. In this second leg, however, I was able to sense his presence in the challenges and the harshness that we faced. But I think I can confidently say that we are a little more prepared than they were, and they must have had more difficult times. And that took me to a whole other level of admiration and respect to his character and the travels that he did and everything that he's done. Just took it to a much, much higher level. Also, which is the icing on the cake, I guess, that resulted from this expedition on a very personal level was, of course, bringing the two sides of the family in the UK and Saudi together. Something I think I can speak for everyone, on everyone's behalf, when I say that we all owe it to Mark and will forever be grateful for it. For us to be gathered around the dinner table, remembering Grandpa and sharing stories between the grandchildren and the children and the great-grandchildren was just one of the most amazing feelings that we will all cherish forever.
And how do you look back on the expedition, Mark?
With great satisfaction and enormous pride, really. It was not the most physically challenging expedition I've ever done. It wasn't the longest expedition I've ever done, but in terms of the richness, the experience of delving into Philby's story and using podcasts, which is a new thing for me, to try and share that with thousands of people around the world. It's just been fantastic to be able to tell a story, really. So looking back upon it with great pride and gratitude to my incredible teammates.
We sat and spoke in the Royal Geographical Society Lecture Theatre at the time of the launch back in September 2022, the very theatre Philby lectured in. And I asked you, what do you think he would say to you before you headed off to follow in his footsteps? And your reply was that you think you'd have probably had a blazing row. I wonder, how do you think that conversation might go now if you were speaking to Philby?
Yeah, well, Philby had a blazing row with most people that he met. But do you know what? I think in knowing now what I know, I think we'd probably have more. We'd have more of a conversation before the blazing row occurred, and because I think Philby. Do you know, I was lucky to meet Wilfrid Thesiger twice before he died. He saw out, that incredible traveller saw out his days in an old people's home in Coulsdon in Surrey, and I went to pay homage to him on a couple of occasions. And he was very negative about the change in his beloved desert and the impact of the internal combustion engine on the life of the Bedouin people. For him, it was the end of Arabia, but you know, once he got that off his chest, you could really see his ears prick up when you'd said, but do you know, Sir Wilfrid, you can still sit on the top of a sand dune at night and do a complete 360 and not see a light in any direction, and then you'd got him. And so I think Philby would appreciate the parallels between our two journeys. I think he might appreciate, because we all like a pat on the back, our admiration for him. But you know what? I think I'd probably be a bit more respectful of him because I know more about him now, and perhaps I wouldn't go in with my defence shield up expecting a blazing row, because until I went to Riyadh and met Reem and her family, every photograph I'd ever seen of Philby, he was looking pretty stern and formidable. But in the Philby house, I saw a photograph that I'd never seen before. And one was of Philby's passport, in which he looked incredibly stern again. But behind the sofa, and I'm looking at that photograph now. There's a photograph of a man with a big smile on his face and a real warmth. And Mike and his family spoke about what a very great family man Philby was. And in that photograph, I saw a different man. And, he found great contentment in the desert. And I think he probably had that smile on his face most of the time when he was in the desert. But it was civilization that caused him to frown. So I think we probably may disagree inevitably, because Philby disagreed with most people on most things. But that row would be much longer in coming. We'd have much more to talk about and much more in common. So what became of Philby when he reached Jeddah? Remember the bigger picture, that he was travelling under the protection of Ibn Saud to prove to Ibn Saud that he had the loyalty and the allegiance of the tribes in the central regions of Arabia. Clearly, the other contender for the throne of Saudi Arabia was Sharif Hussein of Mecca, who resided in Jeddah. This was his stronghold, and Sharif Hussein would not allow Philby to return to Riyadh overland. He forbade such a journey, which was a frustration for Philby because he'd left some of his belongings in Taif and in Riyadh. So Philby's journey overland was up. And really he moved on at this point to the next stage of his extraordinary life. And he spent time in Cairo, which he loved, described Cairo as the most wondrous city. And then it was felt that really, having spent so much time within Central Arabia, he needed to be a bit more aware of what was going on in the Greater War. So from Cairo, he sailed to Damascus, And from Damascus, he was able to return to where he started in Basra. He spent the remainder of his life wandering Arabia. Occasional trips to Britain, often driving by car across country. Even in his early 70s, he was still driving from London to Riyadh, an extraordinary man. He died on the 30th of September 1960 in Beirut, where he was quickly buried in the Muslim graveyard in El Bushara. His son Kim scrawled on that headstone, "The greatest of Arabian explorers," and that's something we've all come to appreciate over the past weeks and months. His death didn't go unnoticed at his beloved Royal Geographical Society in London. Lawrence Kerman was the director of the RGS at the time, and he noted, when Sinjan Philby died suddenly at the age of 75 in Beirut on September the 30th, 1960, on his way back to Arabia from London, the Royal Geographical Society lost one of its most distinguished explorers and a man of very remarkable character. During long and often solitary journeys, Philby was able to free himself from the political and moral controversies into which he so hotly plunged in more civilized surroundings. All attention was concentrated, without thought of personal comfort or advantage, on the scrupulously careful collection of scientific observations of all kinds. These formed the foundations of our knowledge of Arabia. Our own expedition legacy is only just beginning. Over the next 12 months, there are already a series of lectures, exhibitions, talks and conferences lined up in the UK, Saudi Arabia and in the USA. The Heart of Arabia Expedition social media and website will share all of the information and updates about these, so keep your eyes peeled. And thank you for being part of our journey, and for joining me and the team through all of the podcasts, and for travelling with us across Saudi Arabia in the footsteps of the great explorer, Harry Sinjan Philby. The Heart of Arabia Expedition podcast is an adventurous audio production.